We had a discussion panel, tradition and politic, like how it's connected, how it's influenced one on another, and how it influenced on some poll. And this film is about this. And I'm curious, what's happened then? Did they have some decision after, like what? Did they just leave it like this, without, or this companies still wants to make?
Well, like just
yeah.
if I can a little bit specify, like because there is some time after you finish this film, so we can see that events unfold, you know, unpredictably. So, what is the current state of events?
Yeah, so there are many things to say about this. First of all, I would like to thank you. You know, it means a lot to me, especially from this festival. You know, that should have happened in Ukraine, and yeah, we are forced to have it here, and it's still wonderful, you know, to be able to fight with culture, you know, the way you do it. There's been so many things that happened since we finished that film. So we released that film at the very beginning of the 2020. So there was a referendum on independence, which was a consultative referendum. So basically, the referendum itself was made because no one actually knew back then how to finish the war. They were like, look, you know, there's been 10 years of civil war, 20,000 people. To put it back in context, you're looking at 10% of the population that disappeared. It's an island of 200,000 people. You have 20,000 that have died, maybe more. No one actually knows. A lot of people are still looking for the remains of their relatives, you know, we're talking, you know, 20 years later, right? And so there was this consultative referendum that occurred, and 98% of people voted for independence. And now it's opening up the path for the building of a nation, right? Because Papua New Guinea always said they need to change their own constitution, and this is where the politics are starting to become a little bit problematic, because everything is never really certain with Papua New Guinea. Last week, for example, Australia declared that they signed a new military partnership with, last week, a few weeks ago, a new military partnership with Papua New Guinea. And that really stirred lots of really bad stuff, and they said that they would always back Papua New Guinea politically, regardless of what happens, you know, in Bougainville. And that woke up a lot of trauma, you know, compared to, you know, because of the whole history of what occurred, because of the fact that the army itself was trained and armed by Australia. It was really a colonial war by proxy. So that is, there is a path opening up now. Probably within the next 3, 4, 5 years, you may hear in the news, you know, that Bougainville may become an independent nation. But what does that mean? What is actually happening today? What's happening today is exactly the same story that what happened with Papua New Guinea in the first place. Papua New Guinea, you're looking at an independence that occurred in 1975. They changed hands 6 to 7 times in 100 years, right? They were colonized by the Germans, by the British, etc. They had the Japanese, there was World War I, World War II. So you've always been invaded and been in the care of, you know, other countries. And what occurred is you're looking at an independence that arrived quite late, because the United Nations were basically telling Australia, look, you have been now colonizing Papua New Guinea for a while. It's it's the beginning of the 1970s. You're late compared to some other, you know, African countries, etc. Now you need to give independence to that place. But Australia said, okay, we will do it, but we will do it with one thing, with the mining program. And that's the very first mine, you know, was the Panguna mine. That's what actually kick-started the whole independence of Papua New Guinea in the first place. It was all the revenue of the mine that were building the states that Australia left independent, but was it really independent? And that, because that's another question, you know, what is independence? You can have political independence, but you can have absolutely zero independence in practical terms, because you have now so many different companies that are after resources. And what's happening with Bougainville, 50 years apart, is exactly the same thing. You now have 7 different mining companies that are fighting for the resources. You have a few NGOs that are doing reports, you know, about what's happening, because there's a lot of bribery happening of tribal chiefs, etc. It's exactly the same story that what occurred back then. So you have this dynamic, which in one way, there are some extraordinary things that are happening. You know, now the president of the island is one of the former revolutionary leaders from the war, and he invited lots of women in power for the first time. because that's also a very big issue. You know, women own the land, and yet they've been completely sidelined because of the whole colonial history. And this is something that really needs to be addressed. It's an absolute drama all around Papua New Guinea, but especially in Bougainville, because of the matrilineal society that is there. Next to that, so that is, you know, political independence may happen in 5 years or whatever. Then you have economic forces that are all, you know, knocking on the door saying, oh, you want an independent country, so you need, you know, big capital, and we can do it for you, etc. Next to that, the person that actually invited me to make this film, she was a young woman, extraordinarily courageous. She comes from the villages that have all been affected, you know, right next to the mine, right? You're looking at landscapes that have been destroyed beyond belief, and in a way, you know, when I look at the film, I think we didn't really do, it's a good job at actually showing how much destruction you have. When you look at 1 billion tons of rocks that have been extracted, you have 500 million, so you got 0.6% that are actually useful, because that's the little mineral that you get, and that will become a bigger and bigger problem with the kind of world that we live in, because there are huge demands for minerals, etc., for the ecological transition. Anyway, let's not get there. But what it means is 1 billion tons of rocks, you take 500 million, it's just a number. So pretty much a very small car is 1 ton. So you would take 500 million cars and you're going to dump them into the local river. And you take 500 million cars and you're going to dump it in the valley. And that's why all the villagers are, you know, now staying at 130 meters above where their ancestors were buried. And this woman comes from these villages, so the land is contaminated, the water, it's basically you have no life really in the rivers that, you know, were ever so important for communities to be able to feed themselves. And she decided to fight. And she took the fight and lodged an official complaint in Australia against Rio Tinto, so the company that's decided to back away because they could see that they would not be able to get back in right now. They may come back later. And they lodged an official complaint thanks to an NGO, and that complaint has actually, there's a mediation process, and they accepted to finance for the very first time, it's been 33 years that they've left, for the very first time they're coming back because they're financing an independent study on the environment to know what is the actual damage, because I don't know, you may remember this huge dam that broke in Brazil, you know, that buried lots of communities, and a few years ago it was Ophir, a mining company. The same thing can happen in Bougainville as well. So every single day you have this huge unfolding disaster. It's not because the mining stopped that, you know, things stopped. It's happening right now. So yeah, that was another big thing that is happening. So in terms of trying to keep Rio Tinto accountable for the damage they created, and hopefully be able to maybe repair. But that is something that is so difficult to do, because big companies like that are never accountable. It's extremely difficult to make them.
Yeah, so there are so many questions to ask, obviously, and it's great that you are so deep into the context, because as much as sympathetic we are towards your characters and the struggle, obviously it's very far away from us, so it's kind of a little bit exotic, it's like very alien, you know, and it's hard to understand these nuances and particularities, so it's great that you are so deep in the context, and of course I encourage audience also to ask additional questions. But before we dive deeper into the topic of your film, can you tell a little bit more about the crew, because you are not the only director, so can you tell us about Alexander and other crew members, because you mentioned this girl who initially invited you to do the project, so can you tell about this collaboration?
Well, it's very much a collaborative project. It's a skeleton crew, you know, we're 4. And it's basically me and my co-director Alexander. I grew up with him, I really wish he could be here. But he's not, in spirit maybe, but, and basically myself, I've been working in Papua New Guinea for over 10 years. I've done several films there, and that's how I started building really strong relationships, especially with young students that then became, you know, quite important, lodging these fights, etc. So it goes back 10 years ago. And that's when I was contacted by them, because they wanted to make a film about their story. They were really scared for their future, basically. And they had seen you know, my first investigations that were more of a journalistic nature, more than this, but they'd seen what I'd done and then trusted me somehow, because The problem is you have virtually no journalists and no filmmakers in Papua New Guinea and certainly Bougainville. And so we decided with Alexandre, like, okay, but it's a story that's of such a scale, you know, you're looking at colonialism over, you know, decades and decades, hundreds of years, you know, and trying to tell that story of the past and the present. And so we took our time. We took our time and we formed a skeleton crew, you know, with that woman, Teonila Roca Matbob, and her husband as well, that I knew from my first previous films, actually. And we all worked together, and this, in a way, is actually an introduction to a bigger project that we've done. Because we have not just done this film, we've also created a whole educational platform. Because we, before going there to try to respect the story, we spent 2 years investigating, going all around the world, because one of the biggest drama that you have with stories of colonialism is the local people don't actually have access to their own history. It's all, you need to go back to the centers of powers, you need to go and look for them, look for those documents there. And so we spent 2 years doing this, going all around the world, I mean not all around the world, but in specific places where we knew we could get access to documentations. That's how we got access, you know, to all the confidential records from the company, etc. And then, when we started, we realized that so many communities were so happy to share their stories, and sometimes, due to the nature of filmmaking, of the limits, you know, of storytelling, etc., there are many stories that are very valuable but could not fit in that narrative. And so we built a multimedia platform with over 30 short films, and with all the secret documentation as well from the war, as a way of, you know, leaving documents, you know, and tools for educational tools, you know, both locally but also outside. Because how is it possible that, you know, this conflict is the biggest of the, you know, Pacific region since the Second World War, yet no one has heard of it, you know, very few people, and that's how we did it. And so, but because you work with indigenous communities, you have to work in an open-ended manner. At least that's how we wanted to do it. We were there, you know, to try to have them reflect on their own histories, but having complete freedom over that. You know, we were actually asking very little questions over, you know, all the research. We had done it before, but we went there and we wanted to live, you know, any options in terms of languages, in terms of places where they wanted to, the kind of stories that they wanted to share, etc. And that's why it spanned over many, many years of my life to, yeah, bring this, and also the platform, which is called colonialsyndrome.org. If you're interested, you know, you can always go there, because this is almost an introduction.
I was wondering regarding your works with archives, were there any obstacles when you were trying, you know, to get these classified materials, and seeing that the struggle is still going on? Like, are there any forces that were acting, you know, against you and your film?
Well, you're always walking on eggshells, you know, when you're doing a story like this, because it's so sensitive. You have so many people that have been touched, you know. Political forces as well, because it's very complicated. You can't get, you know, normal authorization to do a story like this. Like, you need to. There are ways, but you need to be careful always. But for us, we were guaranteed security because we were invited by the former revolutionary people. They said, okay, you guys can work, because you can't just go out there and go in the no-go zone and start filming, because it's still controlled by people with guns, right? And but they guaranteed our safety, so it was okay on that side. And in terms of, you know, the confidential records and all that, it's because I've actually left a small part of the story out of it, because it would have added even more, something even more complicated. Is the company itself. It was one of the two big companies that was, where there was a huge trial against them after the crisis. There was a huge trial for complicity in war crimes in the United States, right? And so he left a whole trail of documents that were extraordinarily useful for us to get. And the trial actually was never completed itself, because on jurisdictional grounds. Because the United States, basically you could attack a big company if they had some kind of interest in the United States. You could lodge a big claim in Washington or whatever, like jurisdiction, California in that case, and attack them there. And the United States got really fed up of this. They said, no, we don't want, because there was another huge trial as well, Michelle in Nigeria, because of extrajudicial killings by private security forces working with this mining company. And yeah, they just stopped these kind of trials. But you have 10 years of documents that have been collected, and so that was helpful. Yeah, it's a film that's extremely complicated to show in Australia.
Yes, that was actually my next question, like where the film was screened, what was the reaction, and do you think that, like in general, films like this have power, you know, to influence and change the situation, and were there like any repercussions of, for example, your work or like much broader your project?
Yeah, it's a good question. We had a cinema release in Papua New Guinea, which was, I was really amazed by that, and I was actually quite anxious as well, because...
how many cinemas are there?
Not many. Actually, no, but in Papua New Guinea, in the capital. So it meant a lot of politicians could actually go, a lot of people actually went, and I was amazed by the kind of reaction that it got, because it's such a sensitive issue also for Papua New Guineans, because they were to go and kill Bolivians. And I was, you know, wondering what would, you know, the reaction be, and it was extremely positive. A lot of politicians were actually sharing the story, saying, look, we need to educate our kids, we need to let them know this is our history, because how on earth can we turn against our brothers, against our own people? There's a whole system here which has been in place, you know, which is a system that is all around the world. You can go around Africa, South America, etc. It's exactly the same that what occurs in Bougainville, and pitting communities against each other all the time. And somehow, my dream with this film is, for me, it's a love letter to Papua New Guinea. You know, it's after working 10 years there, I wanted to make visible that system that just keeps this cycle, you know, at some point needs to end. Because otherwise you're going to get another war, and another war, and another war, and where do we go from there? And you can really see it happening again. Like, yeah, I think I answered your question maybe.
Yeah.
No, in terms of impact, there was one very interesting thing that I was told recently by this woman. She's the one that invited me, she's the one fighting, you know, to try to keep the company accountable, and she also became the Minister for Education for the whole region, right? And she was elected in Parliament, and she told me that through the whole mediation process, actually Rio Tinto executives have seen the films, and came to her and broke down, and telling her how sorry they were, like the new executives, because, you know, the old team is not there anymore. But that somehow the film, she's telling me, is playing some kind of role in accountability. And it's a kind of maybe putting a little bit of pressure, just knowing, oh, that story, you know, exists now. There's the documents that we can use. There's the platform. How big is this? I have no idea. I can't control this. I don't know, but it's something that's really moved me. She told me, yes, 3 weeks ago. This, so, yeah.
Yeah, I think you answered the question perfectly, because obviously, like, it's not like, is film influential in general? Yes, let's make it film and change the world. No, it's like never-ending struggle, and I see that we have a question in the audience.
Hi, thank you guys. So it's short, as an easy question, and maybe not so easy question, that you can feel free to go as deep or, yeah, don't feel any obligation. It goes first one with this getting the video material, like these archives. Where did you find them? Are they in the public domain? And the second question is, how do you, okay, you seem like a person who cares a lot. I guess you have to care a lot to go to create a project like this and just follow through with it. And along your path, what kind of little nuggets of hope have you found in this otherwise quite bleak picture of the way money is operating in colonialism and the role that capitalism is playing in colonialism? You know, obviously here we're creating culture, and there's this relatively fringe group here that cares a lot and would do things differently if we were in power, hopefully. And but there's this tension in capitalism, and there's this system that is financially incentivizing people, including filmmakers, to follow the money, right? to make culture based on who will pay for it and who will pay our bills, so on. So yeah, I'm curious, like, what kind of little nuggets of hope have you found along the way that maybe gave you or us hope that it's going another direction? And yeah, hope that wasn't too intense.
That's a great question. I ask myself this as well. You know, where is hope? And there's always hope. But about the archives, it's simple. It's just you research, and there is one big problem with archives. It's very often they cost a lot of money, and that is a really big problem with trying to tell these stories. Is if you don't have a really big production behind it, then you only have huge budgets and huge productions that can actually tell history. I found films, for example, from the 1920s that were almost not published, that were actually shot by a Marist priest that had interest in anthropology, and he had all this wonderful footage that I really wanted to use. And the ownership lied with the French Scientific Center. I mean, it's a state body, and they quoted me with 2,000 euros a minute to be able to use that film, and I just can't afford that. So that's a really big problem in terms of telling histories. You have to try to be smart if you don't have the budgets for it. But yeah, when you start researching, you find footnotes in books or references of, you know, oh, that person has been there, he must have something. It's I love researching archives, and I love archives in general. It's something that I really I don't know. You just you see history coming alive. You know, there's some magic. You know, with historical footage that I really cherish. Yeah, like it was just 2 years of research alongside all the documents that just tracked, you know, all these. There's very few films that have been made. That's the thing. Like, so I contacted other filmmakers as well that had the last big films were made in 1998. You know, so that's during the war. They broke the blockades to actually go and document, and they are purely war films. You know, so you could get a little bit of that. Yeah, beyond that, you know, on the whole issue of hope, I think for me, what gives me hope is to see the characters in this film. There are some extraordinary characters, you know. The man that planted 1 million trees, for example, he lives in the mountains. Very few people have actually known of him, and he just decided because he looked around. All this knowledge that you see in this film, it's not knowledge that's built in big universities and big schools. It's knowledge built on observation, practical observation about life. Even the kind of narrator that we have in the film, he was the right-hand man of the revolutionary leader, right? The intellectual. He's never really been to school. He's just observed the dynamics of his society. How has it affected? How a big project like this comes in. And this gives me hope because it tells me that people still think and theorize things, and actually have practice as well. You know, in practical terms, planting 1 million trees, and now he's helping communities. He's recreating rivers. He knows where the rivers used to be, and he knows what kind of trees to plant alongside the rivers. I find it absolutely fascinating. That man, and you know, alongside, you know, the character of Ruth as well. You know, she's an extraordinary woman who was going all around the island to tell the people about the mining law, and you can feel the love that she has for the people. And I think, you know, for me, even the soldiers, it's the same. You know, there's a lot of love in there, you know, like for their land and for their people and for their culture. And I think that's where the hope lies. You know, you can, the rest is a huge loss of time, politically, okay? You want to reopen a mine, you're going to lose another 15 years, there's going to be a new war, there's going to be more people dying, etc. You know it already. And so, but the rest is what do you do with what you have? Which is a question that, you know, maybe in the West is a bit more complicated because we grew up in concrete, right? And so we grew up with that idea that nature is separate from us. You know, that we go on school trips, you know, nature trips to go, oh, the trees, etc. Over there, no. It's sorry to say it this way, but it's like over there, no. You're part of it. It's the most practical and logical way is actually to live and care for it, right? And if you start building from there, like he's not the only one. It's just the whole society is like that. If you look at Papua New Guinea, you've got over 90% of people that are rural people working the land, having the most organic, practical practices that you can have. You know, maybe they don't have the labels, but that's what they do, right? You build from there. You know, like that's as simple as, I think there is this obsession, you know, the problem that you have where I have more problems seeing hope is because you don't have time. You don't have time to go, who am I? What do I really need? What kind of government do I have? Do I really need to have huge departments and this huge model and this huge mind to actually finance this? Or who were we before? We were independent nations. Bougainville is 21 different languages, right? With all groups of people, you know, living that have lived like that for at least 30,000 years. Papua New Guinea is 50,000 years, 850 different languages. They've been okay, you know, they're still surviving, and in a way, you know, with maybe the crisis that we have here, I think they'll be okay. But the people that are the most endangered are always the ones that are somehow, when development comes in. That's when you, for the first time, you start seeing the circles of economic dependency. Because you lose your land, you need to work for your food. And if you need to work for your food, then you need to find an activity to do it. And that's where you start losing the balance between your communities, etc., and you become dependent. And then you create poverty pockets, etc., with violence, blah, blah, blah. We know it's all around, but those are the dynamics. And I think for me, hope is time. You know, if you can, it's not up to me. I just one person that just try to build a little bridge of understanding towards, okay, this story exists, you know, etc. But it's locally, you know, locally thinking, who am I and how are we going forward? So I'm hopeful because I met all these people and they're there and they exist, you know. And will they be strong enough? Will they have enough time and I don't know. I want to believe that they do, you know, like, and yeah, I hope it answers this complicated question.
I'm going to play a devil's advocate a little bit here, and so you mentioned that there is also, I mean, in film we see that there was a civil war, and then you mentioned that there is a bribery of tribal chiefs, for example, still going on. So I wanted to know, can you expand a little bit more on the processes within society, because it's like obvious that white men brought a lot of harm to this land, but there are some forces within communities. So what are the problems in between them at the moment?
Well, the main problem, and this is all around Papua New Guinea and in many other societies we've had the privilege to go and work with, it's always a certain kind of man. What you need to understand is when the companies come, where do they go? They go to town. They never go to the rural villages. The politicians don't even go to the rural villages. No one goes to the rural villages to actually ask, you know, well, how is your life and how do you live, etc. No. What happens is you have a handful of men that are businessmen. They just mostly, there's something a little bit controversial. Locally, people are quite suspicious of educated people, because especially educated people that have been, for example, educated in Australia and then go back and find it so difficult to then relate back with their own communities. It happens a lot. And these pockets of men are the ones that are doing all the business deals, are the ones that are reassuring, you know, say a mining company that comes tomorrow that says, look, you can do exploration, you can explore, etc. Here is a little bit of cash, and the communities doesn't know, because they are doing their own deals. At the end of the film, there is this former, you know, fighter that says this. It says, oh, they're going to sign, but nothing will happen. And that has, and you know, and if something actually happens, well, it's a bullet in the head. That's what he tells you, right? And in a way, that hasn't really happened, unfortunately. There's this mining company, this Australian mining company, where it's going to sound crazy, but the CEO of the company is a former Minister for Defense in Australia. He's the CEO of the mining company that gets the exploration license that goes in the north of Bougainville. Okay. They have these people that says, oh, look, you can explore, it's fine. What happened? There's a geologist that lost his life. They kept encroaching on places where they are not supposed to be 10 times. Bougainville people are not violent. Huh? They are extremely peaceful. You really need to push them. But if you push them, they will get back at you. And so at the 10th time of going and telling this geologist, look, we don't need mining, you actually need to go, he had to run for his life and he fell in a ravine. That's not covered in world media. There was a very small piece in a local newspaper, you know, big Australian mining company loses its main geologist on the island. but that's what happens. And that's the danger. I see a bigger danger here, actually, trying to, you said you played devil's advocate, but actually trying to put myself in the shoes of these mining companies. Because of the lack of, because you don't know the rural communities. You don't have anthropologists anymore, maybe you do now, that actually infiltrate and tell you a little bit what's going to happen, and that you have these pockets of resistance, and you can actually map the resistance. Because you've been out for so long, you rely on those middlemen. And the middlemen are the ones that are selling you a story. And when I was there, I spent a long time, in Bougainville and Papua New Guinea, I'm always puzzled by that. Because when you're there, you're like, this is absolutely impossible that mining restarts. If mining restarts, you have a new war. So are they actually aware of that? How can they be aware of that? And I'm wondering if actually, genuinely, they don't know. And genuinely, they're told a story, and I'm trying to be, open-minded here, but where I'm getting at is that you look at media and reporting as well. Where does it come from? It comes from the centers of powers. Where are the centers of powers? They are in towns. The journalist is not going to go to the rural community. He's going to report from town, from this businessman that tells you it's totally fine, etc. So you have such a distortion in the news, and then I think it's a very dangerous setting, for that. Sorry, I talk a lot.
I just had a quick question. You've obviously spent a lot of time integrating yourself among the community there. When do you know when you're ready to start recording, or do you like to start early and get the most authentic version of the stories that are being told, or do you like to wait until you feel more trusted by people around you before you start recording? When do you decide you're ready to start capturing things?
For me, I always try to go back. I think it's very important to always go back to communities. Like the first time, I always consider the first trip as a pure bonus. You just meet people, you don't actually film much. I mean, you end up filming a lot, but with no intention of filming, because you work with communities that are also not used to cameras. Also, I think documentaries is trust, right? Yeah. It's all trust. And it can be also extremely invasive. For example, I hate having a camera pointed at me right now. I feel very uncomfortable, but that's okay. If you come back and if you explain why you are doing it, etc., I think you get a lot more things. I've always worked this way. I've never actually gone to one place and then made a story and then went out, because I think you're just touching the surface. And if I could, I would actually go back, but then money is involved and it's very expensive, to do this kind of films. But I think time over, anything. I think time is the most wonderful thing you can have when making films. You may have, there are lots of projects that would benefit from it. Even if, for me, I started self-funding my films. I was just doing it on my own. My very first feature film, which is entirely self-financed, from working in bars at night and making cocktails, and then during the day I would just go and edit and teach myself all these things. In a way, I really loved it because I was free. I didn't have to answer to anybody. I didn't have, and even with that film, I took my time. Like the producer, it was a little bit of a complicated story, but I managed to just take my time. I think it's for me. I don't know. I imagine you could write a book, or you could take pictures, or you just take your time because you're leaving something. I didn't know if that story could travel, but for me, my only intention was just to leave something for the community. It was like a self-reflective, for me it's a love letter, 10 years of having seen the cycles, having seen, the destruction that happens over every single natural resource there. Okay, and you have this past history that now is completely being buried, let's leave a document. And then, if it can travel, good. If it can resonate with other communities, good, but it's a bonus. Like, what matters to me more is locally. That it can be useful, and you don't control that, but you try. I don't.
I'll also wanted to ask about the emotional aspect of your work, and specifically refer to the scene. Like, I think the most impressive one of the whole film, where the guy with the eggs, you know, tells everything directly to camera, like to each one of us, but to you first and foremost, because you are standing there. How did you feel? And like in general, you can feel a lot of pain and anger still being there in those people. So how you dealt emotionally with this?
This particular scene for me is one of the greatest things I've ever filmed. I don't know if I will film something like that ever again, but it goes back to your earlier questions, because we came back. That character was, we were filming one day with all the big people, the big politicians, the big leaders, etc. And we filmed for 5 hours, and honestly you could take the whole film and put it in the garbage because nothing was coming out. And then there was this man, he was very humble, you know, just sitting on the side, and all of a sudden he stood up and started to speak. And we couldn't understand anything what he was saying, because he was speaking his own language. And he made a speech for about 20 minutes. And you could feel in the room something changed. And all of them then said, you know, he said everything. This is the whole story of the island, of everything that occurred. And so we went back every night, we would translate, you know, the material, and then we understood what he was talking about. He was talking about the mental jail that he's been living with. And with using words that I'd never heard before, extremely precise words about his brain, about that sort of stuff that you can't, I don't know, it's just so extraordinary. And so because we came back, we had to find him. We didn't know who he was, and he ended up actually, occasionally he's a small chief, but occasionally he's the cook for the big people. And he had just come to cook. And that's when he goes out to take his axe, that's actually his bedroom where he stays, and yeah, he keeps his German axe for some reason in that bedroom. And that's the importance of going back, you know, because when we went back, I found him randomly on the side of the road and ran to him, and I'm like, oh my God, you know, I would love to get your story and to have you speak, you know, I need to hear what you've got. And straight away, you know, he was taking us by the hand, he's like, I'll take you to the big people. I'm like, no. You know, we're interested in you. And he asked for 3 days. And a lot of people said that, you know, because you can't, with indigenous communities, I mean, maybe other communities as well, often you just come and you announce yourself, you say, look, I've got this project, I come with the camera, I'm interested in ordinary stories about experience, you know, and memory, okay. And yeah, okay, we'll prepare, we'll think about it, you know, and come back in 2 days, and that's how it happens. In terms of the emotional impact of this, yeah, there were scenes that that will stay with me forever. There were scenes where I'm actually crying when I'm recording. All the testimonies, for example, that happened is the very first time since the end of the war that people were talking. The very first time that all these women, one by one, are sharing the stories of their brothers, the story of their brothers, and you're just so overwhelmed. Like it's, I still every time it hits me, like it's like mini PTSD from just hearing this. The whole scenes at night, for example, I filmed for 24 hours straight. It was the whole night. You had this procession, you know, with the women, with the tuhu, connecting with the spirits of their children. And it lasted until 12 o'clock the next day. And this is just why I'm so grateful, you know, to do what I do, because it will forever stay with me, you know, and I learned so much from the humility, and I actually have no words to you today. It's just every single time I watch this, it just comes back, and I get a little overwhelmed. Yeah.
Questions?
More than questions is to congratulate you, and there are aspects that, I mean, everybody's, even yesterday when people were asking me, everybody's expecting, you know, this idea of hope, or I think there's something about hope and despair that we work through, and I feel that the film, in that sense, leaves you with that, you know, there's this past, but there's a path to the future that you will mention all around. But there's something about the film that brings the idea of how the ethnographers, anthropologists have also been a tool, like religion has been, you know, for colonialism. And I thought that was very interesting how you used that material, because it almost felt, you know, like an apocalypse now, like the journey of the guy going in. And this is, you know, it was so perverse to hear the voice. I mean, it was really nice how you performed that voiceover, but the documents themselves are,
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
When I discovered that document, because for me it was a blueprint for total annihilation.
Yeah.
It's because it comes from someone that knows and has worked. Like this man, actually, I don't say it in the film, but he's the most famous anthropologist of the Pacific region. He's coming from Harvard. He has trained generations of young anthropologists. Even Dr. Roos was actually, because he was in Harvard, then he went to the University of Hawaii, and all his work for the company was secret, right? He never, he always, because it's so controversial, right? And I couldn't believe it. And for me, you know, anthropology, I studied history and anthropology. That's how I started before moving to journalism and then picked up a camera. And it goes back to the essential question of knowledge. Because knowledge can be a weapon and can be used in great ways, but it can also be used for not such great ways, right? And we know this through history. And it touches on so many things, on the ethics of what you do, you know, on how we inform. And this is still happening. I mean, anthropology has played also a role, like, I'd never thought about it this way, you know, but it has actually played a role in, I mean, I know you're from South America, in many conflicts all around South America, informing despots, etc. In Vietnam as well, where the American troops were working as anthropologists, and some people said, oh yes, it's great that they do, because at least they understand local culture. Yeah, but if it's to identify and create hit lists, then it's another story. And that has been the case. It's the dark side of anthropology, but it's of knowledge in general. And for me, I found this interesting because I wanted to have, it's like a dialogue, this film, right? You're getting all these experiences and memories and people sharing, you know, what they live through. And at the same time, you get a little bit in the brain of someone trying to explain to the big corporate what is the situation, how do you need to go about it. And so it's like an impossible dialogue, you know, that just ends up in this absolute drama, you know, in the end. Because if you already know in the 1960s that war is coming, maybe it's a good idea to back off and say, but of course you don't. You design strategies about it.
I'm just going to add a little anecdote coming here. I was in the airport in Amsterdam, and there were like this team of people from the US, and I overhear this conversation, and the guy obviously is coming from the Ukraine conflict, you know, and he's listening to another guy. Yes, I was in Panama. I was, and you hear the countries that he's listing, and obviously, you know, those were countries that had gone through, you know, troubles that we know of, and everything is, you know. Thank you for your.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we don't have much time left, so I will take the liberty to ask the last question. And I was wondering, like, of course there is no if in history, but if there was no history like we see in this film, if there was no copper mine, you know, and no invasion of the white man, what do you think this culture would be like, and what the society would be like? And you mentioned that your film, in a way, it's a love letter, so what do you personally admire about this culture, and like what do you, for example, miss the most being here with us far away from...
What struck me the most, because I'd never heard it before, is going to some villages that haven't been impacted, and the kind of words that they use, they are looking for harmony. And harmony in their village is what they value the most. And this just, it's a simple word, but it's, we had to pinch ourselves, you know, with Alexander, and we're just really, like, you're looking for balance and harmony. And the only thing, you know, from the intellectual leader, you know, that was the really close to the revolutionary leader, the only thing they want is time. This time. It's just they said, look, leave us alone. Like, you want to develop us, we are developed. we've got many concepts. We've got, like, you know, in terms of economic organization, we've had economic organization for thousands of years. Like, we just need to figure out, you know, in the modern world, what do where do we go forward? It doesn't mean, you know, we will walk naked again. It has nothing to do with this. It's time. And so it's an impossible question to answer. It's not a question, so it's fine. What would it be? No, I think it's just listening again, you know, to trying to figure out who you are and where you want to go. Because that question, you haven't had the space and time to ask yourself this, because you've always been conquered by another that has imposed his worldview on you. And yeah, my hope is just that they find this, that they find that space for them. And,
thank you again for your film and for your messages, and we will end up with a small present for you, so please don't go away.
We have this special prize that I want to tell you the story, what is this exactly, because this is handmade prize, and it's, you see our motto of our festival is written here, celebrate life, and your culture is your weapon, your knowledge is your weapon, and we can continue, all spiritual culture is a weapon. We want, it's so so interesting, because when we create the maquette model of this briquette, we wanted to build, you know, to build your dream, your projects, and to gather briquette by briquette every year coming to our festival. So we are waiting for your new film for submitting. And also one interesting thing about this prize, that this craftsman that made it, he went to the front, he joined our Ukrainian army, and we stopped everything because, you know, we couldn't continue. But after some time, we just asked him, and he took a vacation from the war to make this briquette. So I think, yeah, you can feel this heartbeat of Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your film. Don't go so far, because we have a photo session there. Just, yeah. What?
Yeah, just in time, we're moving to the next film, the last feature film of our international competition. And when we were programming, like, already the schedule, I was wondering if we should put this one to the last position in the program, because obviously when you end up on such a note, it's not like you would feel going to a party after that, seriously. But then again, this film delivers so many important messages, and it will force you to reflect on so many questions and issues that maybe we would love to avoid reflecting on. And that's why we created our festival, to face very uncomfortable situations, to challenge ourselves, our beliefs, our vision, and to broaden our horizons. And I believe this film would be a very interesting and important closing point of our competition.
Enjoy.